Hi guys, this is Mike Hibbert back with a Python Django tutorial for you. We're going to be continuing from our last tutorial, which was all about deployment on Heroku and Amazon Web Services, specifically S3 Web Services. And we're going to start by finalizing a few more settings. We covered the vast majority of things that needed to change in our settings.py files and our local settings files. But this time round we're actually going to add a few extra bits just to finalize what needs to be done. Now, the first thing I wanted you to see is that we're in our URLs file, which is the one for the project, not the one in the articles module, just in the actual project urls.py file. We import settings. And the reason why we do that is because we need to do a quick check to see if we're in debug mode or not. If we're not in debug mode, we are aware that we're actually serving these files online, so we need to do an import, and we're importing from Django contrib static files URLs, and we're going to pull in the static files underscore URLs method. When that runs, it basically goes and does some checks in the framework to check where static files are available. Now that can be different from online and offline, as we discussed in the last tutorial. Online will have a website address, and offline will probably just have a local URL. This function here will help us to work out how to make files available, or static files rather, when we're online. And all we need to do is call this method and add the return values to the URL patterns variables that we've got. Okay, so that's one of the final Python kind of tweaks we need to make. One last tweak to do with the actual environment is that we're going to do something very unusual. We're going to go into our Django folder, into the bin folder, and we're going to edit the activate script. Now, you may remember right at the beginning of the series we showed how to activate the virtual environment and we called this activate script from the command line. Now, what this script actually does, if we look inside of it, is it's just basically a shell script. It has various different settings in there. What we need to do is we need to add in 3 extra settings, and these are the credentials that we need for our Amazon Web Services. So we need the storage bucket name, which in my case is Django Tutorials. In your case will probably be different, because you can't have the same bucket name as me, obviously. So you'll basically replace this part with whatever you need. The other sections are when you create your bucket within Amazon Web Services, you'll get an access key, and you'll also get the opportunity to download a spreadsheet that will contain this secret access key. And these 2 credentials are needed so that you can log in and upload your files. This is always also the case inside of your Heroku web server, and I'm going to show you some commands later on of how to set these environment variables. We use this export command when we're on our local machine under Linux, and when we do it with Heroku there's a slightly different way of doing that, but I'll show you that in just a moment. So once you've set that, whenever you go into your command line shell and you type in activate at the command line, your shell script, this activate script, will run and automatically set these for you. So whenever you are using this particular virtual environment, these settings will be specific to this particular project. Now, the beauty of doing it this way is that once you actually set those, if you log out of this or deactivate it and then you activate a different virtual environment, these settings will change, and you will not have to do any configuration. You won't have to type in any special command line arguments or anything like that. It will automatically know. So if you're hopping between projects, it's really useful for this to do this automatically for you. And I thoroughly advise you to make sure that you do this. If you've got 3 or 4 projects on the go on the same machine, and they're all deploying files into Amazon storage buckets, it's the best way to keep yourself from making mistakes is just to let the scripts do the configuration for you. So once we've done that, that would be out the way, and then we just need to either activate using the activate script, or if you already are activated, then deactivate and then run activate again, and that should then refresh all your details. Okay, so the next part is that we need to discuss how to create some version or code versioning on our system. Now, I use Bitbucket. You might not use Bitbucket. You might be using Git or JIT, depending on how you want to pronounce that. My preference is Bitbucket because some of my projects are private and I don't really want people looking into my code. You can have private projects on Git, but they're paid for, and it gets pretty expensive after a while. So that's my personal preference. I don't recommend either one over the other because they're both very good projects. So this will look different when you use Git, for instance. So unfortunately I can't cover both, so I'm showing you the one I use, just for simplicity. Now once you've created a repository inside of Git, then you need to actually link it in with your current project. And if you've already got a project on the go, then you're probably going to need to do something a bit unusual. So normally you would check out a copy of the online version to your machine and then start off your project from here. We've already started the project, so what we need to do is we need to call git init. Once we've done that, then that will then cause this folder structure that we're currently in to become a Git repository. And then the first thing we do would be git add period. Actually, no, that's not the first thing we would do. What we'd firstly do is we'd create a git ignore file. So I've already created one. I'll just show you what the contents of that is. So I have excluded in my git ignore list any PYC files, so that's any compiled Python. I've excluded my my SQLite database. I've excluded my WingWare project files and any log files. I've also excluded my local settings.py file, so that when I do commits into the source code, I'm not committing any local settings that are specific to my machine. This means that if I have somebody else who's developing through there, when they check out stuff, then they don't get my local settings, and then it doesn't interfere with their setup. So if everyone has a local _settings.py file on their system, it's specific to their machine. So any commits and any checkouts shouldn't overwrite each other, and then you can all work as a team without messing around with each other's systems and getting each other a bit cross. So that's what's in there. So once you've created that git ignore, then you'll want to do a git add dot at the end, and that'll just roll through the current sets of folders and add everything. And then following that, you'll want to do a git commit my first commit Okay. Now, at this point, you will not have any place to put it. You'll have a local copy or a local Git repository going, and that's all very nice and well, but after you've done your first commit, we want to start pushing everything into Bitbucket. So to actually link in Bitbucket to this local repository, we want to use git remote add origin, and then we need to quickly cut and paste from our page. I'm going to use the SSH version of this this checkout URL. You can use HTTPS, but I think SSH works better with the command line. So I'm going to copy that, and then we're just basically going to paste that onto the end of this command, which gives us git remote add origin with the URL to my Bitbucket repository. Once I've added that in, when I finally do my git push command, so git push after I've done my commit, that'll upload all the contents of this into the versioning system, and that'll keep that nice and safe. So if this laptop dies today, or I get hit by a bus tomorrow and this happens to be with us, then that'll be fine, because the code is saved, and my colleagues at work can continue to work, although they'd probably all be having a party and drinking lots of whiskey in my wake, but never mind. So that's how we keep our code into version control. But it also leads us on to how we actually get the code from this box onto Heroku, because once we've got a link to Bitbucket, we also need to link into Heroku, because that also uses Git to do its code updates through to our server that we've created. So what we need to do to connect to Heroku is we need to get the tool sets of a tool belt, which is Heroku's set of tools for your operating system that will allow you to hook up through the command line when you're doing deployments. So there's three sections. There's the Mac OS section, and then Windows, obviously, so they're all different in terms of what you're asked to do, but there's some nice little instructions at the bottom of here that just basically explain how easily you can do this. It does, at the bottom of the page, talk about using Heroku Create. It's not really the way I like to do things, but you can do that if you want. I prefer to create my apps from the web interface, and there's a reason for that, which I'll show you shortly. However, in my case, I used the Ubuntu install script, and basically after it's all installed, it gives you a set of Heroku commands that can help you to link up. Once that's installed, we want to link up our Git repository to the thing that we've actually created on Heroku. So I would have, by this time, I would have went through the whole installation of the Heroku tool belt, but then I've gone into the Heroku web interface and created an app. So let's just quickly look at how the apps get created in Heroku. I'm not going to go into massive amount of detail of this, because I think if you just look at the pages themselves, it's very simple to create apps on Heroku, and it's a two-step process as far as I can see. So you click create app, and I don't know, choose is nice for a name. This has to be something unusual, or what's the word, unique, that's the word I'm looking for. So it can't be the same as someone else's Heroku app, which is fine, because if you've got a domain name that you want to point through, when you point that through, your domain name will override this anyway. It's just for you to get started creating your app. So we create the app, and it tells you what the URL is, and it also tells us that it has a Git repository, and this is the basically the address that we'll be passing through our code when we deploy. However, we don't have to actually mess around with that too much, because what we do at the command line is we allow Heroku to actually do the work for us. So to get Heroku to configure our Git repository, we have to call Heroku, and just add the right commands in, and then git remote -a, and then the name of your app. So in my case it is Django tutorial, and then Heroku will automatically connect through to Heroku's web services. It'll query my list, and it'll see that I've got this app here in the list called Django Tutorials. It will go through to its settings page, and it'll basically ask it, how do I get hold of this Git URL? And the web services will pass that back and automatically push it into the list for Git. So if you typed git remote -v after you've done the Heroku git remote command to install that, you should then get yourself a list. So there's 2 for Heroku, that's fetch and push, and 2 for origin, which is actually our Bitbucket. So once we've done that, we've got the task of actually pushing files through to Heroku. So we've created everything that we need in terms of the the version control systems, knowing where to put information and where to pull from. So we know how to back up, and we now know where to deploy. So what's next? So to commit, normally we do, after our git commit command, we do git push, and this will push through to our Bitbucket. However, if we want to then deploy code through to Heroku, we simply type Heroku in the end, and from that it knows, because we've got these tag or names of repositories, it knows that we should be pushing to this one and not our Bitbucket. So that would push through the code onto the web Heroku web service, and currently it should look something like that. You'll notice there's no CSS formatting and no images or anything like that, and that's because we've not put our files onto the S3 servers. Now, if you've updated your Activate and reactivated your environmental variables, then the next stage of this should be relatively simple, because we've got a little bit of an update to do our settings, and that's simply that instead of just including the AWS access key ID and bucket name, we're actually going to include a way of accessing our secret key and this extra preload metadata, which basically forces us to only update actual files that have changed on the system. Apparently there's some kind of weird bug that can occur at times. I've never experienced it myself, but I've seen posts on the internet where some people have said if you don't include this setting, you may get into trouble. But once we've pulled that in, the Django framework should then know how to access our AWS storage bucket. Last time in our previous tutorial, we did do our change to static file storage through to S3, and that should then know that we're actually going to push through to S3 and not through to local storage, but only if we're not in debug mode. Now, if we want to push our files from our local machine through to S3 just to get things started, then we need to set our local setting for debug so that we can then have this be false. And the reason why that is because we want to force this condition to be true so that we can do a deployment from our local machine using the S3 Boto stuff, and that should then upload the files automatically for us, and we shouldn't have to go through to our web interface and one by one pick the files up, which is what you have to do if you do this. So you can upload there, but that's, you know, pretty slow and clunky, and we want to take advantage of some neat features to do with our Django framework. So how do we trigger that? Well, first of all, we need to make sure, as we have done, that debug in our local settings equals false. So this is telling the system that in the case of this particular time around, these variables need to be set as if they were online, not like we would use them offline. Now, what happens when you do that is that the Boto storage will go into its settings and it will notice that these variables are available. It will then look at the static storage files setting, and it will go, oh, I'm set to, like, I'm online, so I must be online, and therefore it attempts to do the upload through to S3. It won't do that if we don't set that to that debug to false. So how do we trigger all the uploads? Well, it's the same way as you would normally do when you do the collect static. So you just basically do manage.py collect static. It says yes or no. Do you want to overwrite the files? There aren't any files on my S3 right now. We'll just double check that. Yep, definitely empty. So let's go. So we can see there it's rolling through everything. It's pulling through all the admin files, uploaded files, CSS, JavaScript. That shouldn't take very long. Yeah, that's done. And if I just check my storage bucket, yep, that's them all uploaded now. So in theory, now that I've deployed my code using the Heroku, the push command for Heroku, then that should have worked. Except it's not. But never mind. Okay, so there's obviously a bit of an error. That means my CSS isn't getting through. It's definitely there. Maybe it could be something to do with permissions. I'll just try and make all of these public. Whoops. Make public. Is that making much of a difference, I wonder? Nope. Okay. Right, so I'm just going to stick this on pause and find out quickly, because that's not what I expect to happen. But bear with me 2 seconds and I'll be right back. Okay, right, I'm back. And I managed to fix it, and the reason why is because during my over eagerness to make this tutorial, I went and deleted the assets folder and changed the static folders structure without thinking about it, and as a result it broke. So now that I've fixed that, we now have our assets in the correct place, and now, as you can see, they're accessible. So it just goes to show that even after you've got years and years of experience with the language, you can screw up. So it's very, very important to make sure that you have as little thing that you can potentially mess up on your own. Hence all of this attempt to try and create configuration scripts that'll do all the work for you. But the happy news is that with a little few clicks I was managed to fix it, so that's great. That hasn't taken me absolutely ages. So as you can see, we've uploaded our static files to S3. We've done the push command through to Heroku, which has deployed our code. Now that's the web application up and running. So that's pretty much all you need to know in terms of that. But here's a couple of more pointers for you that'll really help you if you get into trouble. The first thing is that if you're using Heroku, you can use Heroku logs, and Heroku logs, when you execute that from the command line, will let you look directly into the web server's logs so that you can see what's going on. And as you can see, it's pretty busy. There's quite a bit of information in there, and then if there are any errors, you should see them in these log files, and that helps you to diagnose your online and offline stuff. Another really good one is also Heroku PS scale web equals. Now this command basically allows you to scale how many machines your web application's running on. So if you think of this like virtual machines, you by saying 1, you're saying this runs on 1. By saying 100, you're basically telling Heroku to scale up to 100 web servers, so that, you know, if you've got masses of traffic, you can cope with it. Also, if you say none, this can cause Heroku to more or less restart your web server. Well, actually not restart it, it's more like it switches it off completely. And then if you run the command again and say 1, it switches it back on again. So if you've got any issues where Heroku seems to have stuck, and you feel like the last few errors that have gone on when you've had some problems have actually frozen up the server, then all you can do is do that command with 0, and then do it again with 1, and it'll spin the server back up, and your web application very often starts to kick in and works fine. Now, deployment's a bit of a black art, to be honest, and there are other ways of making this even more simple. Now, I've done it all by command line and all by showing you this by hand, but normally what you would do is you would do all of these settings, like your settings.py and your local settings. You would do that right at the beginning of your project. You'd also have Heroku set up at the beginning of your project. You'd also have Git set up at the same time. So you shouldn't necessarily come across all of these complex things to do all in one go. You should be able to set up a basic set of configuration settings that'll help you to get started anyway with your normal projects, and those shouldn't change all that much really. Okay, so in my next future tutorial, I plan to show you how we can automate this even further and make this much more simple, using a nice nifty little library that comes along with Python. But I'm not going to tell you any more about that. You'll have to wait till the next tutorial. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you learned a lot from it. If you did, then please click the like button, and if you'd like to know more about other tutorials in the future, then please click the subscribe button, and we'll send you a notification as soon as it's published. Thanks for watching.